Every time I head out to a horse sale, there's no telling what I might find. Most smaller auctions in the US do have a section of horses that are sold loose. These horses are sold as is with very little to no information. These horses are often at risk of shipping to slaughter or bouncing around from auction to auction. Many of the horses I buy look like Nigel or Skeletor, but the truth is there are tons of horses that look like Primrose that end up at these sales as well. The day I saw Primrose at the sale, I remember thinking that she was probably going to be above my budget. I like to stay around 50 cents a pound, so I know I'm doing the most good for the horses that are at risk. Each sale, I usually have a long list of horses. I put little notes next to them so I know who they are when they come in the ring. A little star means they're really nice. And this is what I wrote down for Primrose that day. She had a huge bite on her neck. She was very sweet, and I put a little heart next to her notes so I knew that she was one that I loved. She went through the sale ring and there wasn't a lot of interest in her, so I ended up getting her for only $400. I could tell right away that she was a really sweet-natured, gentle horse. When I got her home, I did a few things with her. It was obvious that she had been handled as a young horse, but not recently. In addition to the bite she had on her neck, her feet were also a little bit long. She needed a good deworming protocol, but other than that, she seemed relatively healthy. Thankfully, I was able to get her in to see my vet the very next day, and we got her neck wound all sutured up. After she had a few days to settle in, I wanted to make sure I got her feet under control as soon as possible. I did end up calling her owner and found out a lot of information on this little girl. She actually ended up being a very well-bred 2-year-old that ended up at the sale after her owner went through a really nasty divorce and lost her job. Many times the previous owners don't want you knowing anything about the horse that you just bought, but Prim's owner was over the moon she ended up in a really nice home. After a few months, Prim started looking like a completely different horse. I made sure she was getting everything her growing body needed, and I was able to watch her go from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan in a very short amount of time. She got red light therapy on her neck so it wouldn't leave any scarring. As she began to get stronger, I decided that she was healthy enough for me to start her under saddle training. She had gotten quite round, which made fitting a saddle to her a little bit difficult, but she was probably one of the easiest horses for me to do the very beginning steps of the saddling process with. She was a little bit sassy, but she never showed any real trouble with accepting the saddle or learning how to move forward carrying it around. And for a horse that had no training, she was excelling very quickly at the basics. Very smart girl. Uh-oh, you did it again. I had purchased a few horses in a row that had a lot of trauma around their early training, and Prim made me remember what it's like to work with a horse that had been treated right all the way up until the time I bought them. Although her owner had fallen on hard times and Prim did lack a bit of the nutrients she was needing to grow up big and strong, it didn't seem to stunt her in any way. As I moved through her ground training, she was acting more like a horse I had picked up from the breeder than one I had scooped out of a loose pen. She was willing and quiet, and even though I didn't have her for very long at this point, I continued her training so she would be fully prepared to carry a human around when she was big enough. This is the very first ground driving session I did with her. But just as I was beginning to get to the good stuff, winter came. Since Prim was only turning 3 years old, there was no rush for me to get her started under saddle. When I pick up a young horse like Prim at a sale, I don't like to start them until they're 4 or 5. She had a lot of growing to do, so she got all winter off, and then when spring rolled around, I noticed that she had started to grow again. Compared to the fall, she was getting long and lean, and all of the good feed she was getting all winter long was showing up in her dappled coat. She just got to hang out for most of the spring, but then in the summer I wanted to test out and see how much she remembered. She did still have the same bit of sass, but it became very apparent that all of the growing she did really helped her become more balanced and comfortable carrying the saddle around. Because I usually have around 10 horses in training at any given time, Prim was given a lot of the summer off. She went through several growth spurts and continued to fill out and mature. I noticed she was continuing to get more balanced and relaxed in her movements, and she was turning into a gorgeous horse. Prim is the kind of horse when I get in, I don't ever want to let her go. Because she is registered, she is one that I had thought about selling before I started under saddle. This usually allows me to have an extra spot in the barn so I can save another horse. But every once in a while, it is really nice to start a horse under saddle that doesn't have any prior training problems or physical issues. When I see a nice young horse like Prim at the horse auction, I have a real mental debate with myself. Typically, I can only buy 1 or 2 horses at a time. So when there's a horse that looks like Prim and a horse that looks like Skeletor or Nigel, it can be very difficult to decide which one to purchase. I did end up receiving Primrose's papers, but if she were to leave the sale that day without them, there is no doubt in my mind that she would have been shipped to Canada straight away. Prim has been one of the easiest horses for me to bring along. Her nasty neck wound is 100% healed. You can't even tell that it was ever there. I typically would prefer a gelding over a mare because they are a little bit harder for me to keep at my place. But Primrose has been the perfect companion for Frisco Bill these last couple of years. This last summer, I felt like she really was starting to look like a much more mature horse. And after my veterinarian came out and pulled her wolf teeth, I decided it was time to put the first ride on her. I do like to start all of my horses in a halter, but that is no reason to skimp on proper dental care. Typically, when I put the first ride on a horse, I like them to stand still for me to mount and dismount without a saddle. I basically use my body as a giant curry comb. I think it really helps them focus, and typically our first ride looks a lot like this. Since I've already ground driven Prim, she understands how to steer both directions. She knows how to stop as well as back up. Since most of the young horses I get from auctions have some prior trauma, this is the perfect way to put the first ride on them. Prim probably would have saddled up perfect and ridden around just fine, but there's no reason that she can't get the same treatment that all of my other horses get. I have been patiently waiting for about 3 years to really ride Prim, and as I look towards the future, I am pretty excited about this girl. I hope Prim's journey maybe opened up some eyes about what kind of horses I'm able to find at these auctions, and that with a little bit of elbow grease and training, they can turn out gorgeous. What do you guys think? Would you ever take a chance on a horse like Prim at an auction? Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.